What if almost every piece of sales advice you've ever read, uh, all those magic words, the closing tactics, those mirror affirmations you see plastered all over social media, what if all of that was written by someone who has literally never had to sell a real product to a skeptical human being just to put food on the table?
I mean, it's a profoundly unsettling thought when you really, sit with it,
Yeah.
because we consume this endless stream of theory, right? So much polished, heavily marketed advice on persuasion. But when you apply any real scrutiny to the source,
The foundation is just incredibly hollow.
exactly, you realize you are taking basically survival instructions from someone who has never actually been in the jungle.
And that ultimate disconnect is our target today. We are taking a deep dive into Chapter 1, the introduction to Joe Girard's legendary playbook, How to Sell Anything to Anybody.
It's such a classic.
It really is. And for anyone listening who is interested in business, entrepreneurship, or even just the psychology of human persuasion, consider this your antidote to all that motivational fluff crowding the bookstores today.
Right, because today is about understanding the brutal, gritty mechanics of how to transition.
Yeah, transitioning from a burnt-out hunter, someone desperately chasing daily leads just to survive, into a systematic farmer who cultivates this self-sustaining ecosystem of lifetime buyers.
And we're pulling this blueprint straight from someone who didn't learn it in a seminar. He was forced to master the craft out of pure, unadulterated desperation.
Which is key, right? The context of that desperation is the lens through which we have to view everything in this text.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we aren't analyzing academic theories or, boardroom white papers here. We are looking at raw survival tactics forged in the 60s and 70s, which then evolved into a world-class, statistically unprecedented system.
So to understand that system, we really have to start where Girard starts, which is this brutal, unforgiving critique of the expert industry itself.
Oh, he pulls no punches.
No, he doesn't. He draws this sharp line in the sand between what he calls the spectator and the frontline professional. He argues that taking sales advice from a guy who, say, only closes a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deal once every 2 years, that's a fundamental mistake.
Yeah, because it's like taking marathon training advice from the guy who drives the pace car.
Okay, let's unpack this pace car metaphor because it's so good. The guy in the pace car knows the route, right?
Exactly. He knows the mileage. He can see the finish line perfectly through the windshield.
But he isn't the one managing lactic acid buildup.
Right.
He isn't the one hitting the physical wall at mile 20. He has the view, but he doesn't have the blisters.
And expanding on that metaphor is so crucial to understanding the psychology of the modern professional. Like, why are we, as a culture, so easily seduced by those pace car spectators?
That's a great question. Why do we love them so much?
It comes down to the human brain's natural aversion to pain and rejection. I mean, people naturally gravitate toward shiny theoretical advice because it doesn't demand the grueling, belly-to-belly daily rejection of retail sales.
Theoretical advice is inherently safe.
Totally safe. It promises a shortcut. It tells you, hey, if you just memorize this specific script or hold your hands in this, authoritative posture, the gates of wealth will magically open for you.
And Girard just completely shatters that illusion right out of the gate.
He really does. He warns the reader that a vast majority of these authors and seminar gurus might have sold for, a few weeks?
Yeah. Took a few brutal rejections to the chin.
Figured out the psychological toll was way too high, and realized it was infinitely easier and more lucrative to just write a book about selling than to actually do it.
He practically calls them out by name. He says they never sold much in their lives except the books they are currently pitching to you.
Which is such a burn.
It is. And to appreciate the gravity of that critique, we have to look at Girard's actual verified credentials. Because in an industry full of self-proclaimed experts, his claims are a matter of public, audited record.
Yes, audited by Deloitte & Touche, no less.
Exactly. Recognized by the Guinness Book of Records as the world's greatest salesman. In 1966 alone, which was only his 4th year in the business, he moved 614 retail units.
We really need to pause and seriously analyze the math on that 614 figure, because the sheer physics of it validates his authority.
It sounds impossible.
It does. 614 retail units in a single year. If you subtract Sundays, holidays, and, maybe a brief vacation, you are looking at roughly 300 working days.
Right.
That means Girard was completely finishing the transaction, and delivering more than 2 retail cars every single working day.
And the text is highly explicit about the nature of these sales, too. Like, these were absolutely not fleet deals.
Oh, right. No, he wasn't calling up a local plumbing enterprise and selling them 50 service vans at a wholesale discount with a single signature.
No, this was one car at a time, face to face, dealing with individual, everyday people walking through the front door of a Chevrolet dealership in Detroit.
Which makes it even more staggering.
But I have to play the skeptic here for a second, just to push back slightly.
Go for it.
Why does this specific type of product matter so much to his underlying argument? I mean, isn't the fundamental psychology of sales kind of universal?
That's a fair question.
Like, if a corporate executive sells a $10 million enterprise software package to a multinational bank, aren't they utilizing the exact same baseline persuasion skills as the guy selling a station wagon in Detroit? The stakes are actually millions of dollars higher for the software executive, so why does Girard prioritize the retail salesman as the ultimate proving ground?
It is a valid challenge, for sure, but Girard's philosophy dictates that they are entirely different psychological battlefields.
How so?
Well, the psychology of retail selling cars, home appliances, tailored suits, just everyday consumer items. It requires a high volume of transactions with inherently skeptical consumers who are spending their own fiercely protected hard-earned money.
Right. Their own money.
Exactly. When a corporate procurement officer purchases a $10 million software package, they are certainly under pressure, obviously, but they are spending the company's money.
A budget was already allocated for that software by a board of directors.
Right. The money doesn't represent their personal sacrifice. But put yourself in the shoes of a working-class family walking onto a car lot in 1966.
Yeah.
They're about to spend the money that was supposed to act as their safety net. That down payment represents their kids' college fund, their grocery budget, or their mortgage security.
So the emotional weight of that purchase is massive.
It's exponentially higher. And because of that, the level of inherent defensive skepticism is also exponentially higher.
The stakes for the buyer are visceral and deeply personal, which fundamentally changes the emotional temperature of the entire interaction. I mean, the corporate buyer might be worried about their quarterly review, but the retail buyer is worried about their family's survival.
Precisely. And because of that intense emotional weight, the retail salesperson faces a daily, relentless volume of deeply personal rejection that the corporate spectator rarely encounters.
That makes sense.
In a corporate environment, a no is often logistical, right? Like, it's not in the budget this year, or we're going with a different vendor.
Right. It's just business.
But in retail, a no is often a direct, hostile rejection of the salesperson themselves. So Girard's overarching point here is that the psychological survival mechanisms you absolutely must have to thrive in a high-volume, high-rejection environment, you just can't extract them from a textbook written by a theorist.
They have to be forged in the fire of daily, grueling practice.
Exactly.
So the immediate practical reality check for you listening right now, take a hard look at the people you are taking advice from. Audit your mentors. Before you internalize someone's advice on how to navigate adversity, ensure that their daily survival actually depended on the skills they are selling you. If they have only ever driven the pace car, you cannot let them dictate how you run the race.
And that critical audit of external advice, it flows really naturally into Girard's next major target, which is the internal advice people give themselves.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
It really is. Because once you strip away the useless books and the pace car gurus, the salesperson is left completely isolated on the floor, trying to figure out how to survive that daily grind. And that leads to the traditional, deeply flawed coping mechanisms people use.
Which brings us to the fallacy of empty affirmations.
Right.
If we throw out the shiny books, what is the struggling professional left with? Often, it's just the mirror.
The good old mirror pep talk.
Yeah. Girard launches a massive assault on the popular self-help tropes of his era, and let's be honest, these tropes are still heavily prevalent today. We're talking about the whole concept of hyping yourself up in the mirror before work, aggressively repeating expressions like PMA.
Positive mental attitude.
Exactly. He argues that engaging in these forced, hype-based rituals without thoroughly understanding the foundational bedrock of why you feel the way you do, it's no different than squeezing a rabbit's foot in your pocket.
It is pure superstition.
Right. To use another analogy, here's where it gets really interesting. He says doing this is like paying a premium for a beautiful, vibrant coat of paint and then applying it over a completely crumbling, termite-infested, rotting foundation.
It looks fantastic for a day or two.
But the moment a storm hits, the entire structure is still going to collapse.
The psychology of why forced positivity consistently fails under pressure is fascinating. And Girard just hits the nail on the head here. Consider what happens when you just paste a frantic positive affirmation over a deep-seated, unresolved insecurity.
Like, what actually happens on that showroom floor when a stressed, hostile customer screams in your face?
Right. Or what happens when you lose 5 consecutive deals that you desperately needed to pay your rent?
Yeah.
That thin, superficial layer of conceptual paint chips right off, instantly exposing the rotting wood underneath.
The foundational insecurity isn't protected at all. It's just temporarily hidden.
Exactly. Girard's thesis is that you cannot build a durable, winning attitude without first doing the incredibly painful, unglamorous work of understanding your losing attitudes.
You have to ask the hard questions.
Right. Where did those specific negative patterns originate? What triggers them? Why do you subconsciously cling to them when things get difficult?
And what gives this section so much power is that Girard isn't preaching this psychological theory from an ivory tower. He uses his own brutal, incredibly dark backstory as the primary case study.
It's a tough read, honestly.
It really is. He openly admits that he spent the first 35 years of his life as a self-proclaimed spectacular loser.
Yeah, he was fired from roughly 40 different jobs.
40 jobs. That is just staggering.
And he couldn't handle the structure of the military either, lasting only 97 days in the U.S. Army.
He was a failed crook who ended up spending time in juvenile detention.
He even faced devastating bankruptcy as a small-time home builder because he got conned on a land deal.
He was carrying this massive mountain of trauma, failure, and public humiliation. I mean, you cannot simply look at a mirror, clap your hands, and say, I am a champion, when your entire lived experience, every single data point in your life for 35 consecutive years, has relentlessly taught you the exact opposite.
No, you can't. And Girard is insisting that rigorous self-awareness must precede any attempt at self-improvement. He actually details the origins of his own rotting foundation.
Yeah.
He explains how his father used to beat him physically in the cellar of their home, constantly verbally abusing him, telling him he was entirely worthless, assuring him that he would inevitably end up in jail.
It's so dark. But when a child hears that from a primary caregiver, it creates a profound, deeply internalized belief system.
He truly believed he was no good. In
Yeah.
fact, he notes that sometimes he actively acted out and sabotaged his own life just to prove his father right.
Wow.
Yeah, operating on this twisted, tragic subconscious hope that if he became exactly what his father predicted, his father might finally validate him.
That is incredibly heavy, but it is the reality of human behavior. If you don't aggressively confront the why behind your actions, why you sabotage your own success, why you are paralyzed by the fear of rejection, why you fold under pressure, no acronym, no rabbit's foot, and no amount of positive thinking is going to save you when you are standing face to face with a difficult prospect.
It demands a rigorous, very uncomfortable self-audit. And the application here is highly practical for the listener.
Right.
Before you attempt to artificially inflate your confidence with empty mantras, you have to sit down in a quiet room and identify the root causes of your negative behavioral patterns. You have to map out your own foundational rot.
Because once you understand exactly what is broken in the foundation, then you can actually pour new concrete.
Exactly, because if that foundational trauma is just sitting there unresolved, just waiting to be triggered by the slightest conflict, what happens when a naturally hostile stranger walks through the showroom doors?
How do you react?
Right. If you are insecure, you will likely react with reciprocal hostility or defensive manipulation, which is why dismantling those internal insecurities is the mandatory first step before you can execute his next major strategy.
Which is the moment of contact. If we strip away the fake mirror affirmations and we do the hard work on our foundation, we are still left completely naked on the showroom floor. How do you survive that raw, terrifying moment when a prospect actually approaches?
It's the ultimate test.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's where Girard introduces this brilliant concept of the bloodless war. He frames the reality of the buyer-seller dynamic without an ounce of sugarcoating.
None at all.
Think about the last time you, the listener, walked onto a car lot or into any high-pressure retail environment. Your guard was completely up, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You were scanning the room, waiting for the trap to spring. You walked in expecting to be hustled because historically, salespeople have not earned the benefit of the doubt. You were ready for a fight.
And Girard completely embraces that reality. He tells the reader, yes, make no mistake, it is a war. But the revolutionary twist is how he defines the victory condition.
Right.
He declares that it is a war against the customer's mistrust, not a war against the customer themselves.
The level of empathy required to operate this way in a high-stress environment is just staggering to me.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, let's look at the traditional adversarial dynamic that plagues most sales floors. Most salespeople, either secretly or quite vocally in the break room, they deeply resent the customer's skepticism.
Oh, for sure. They view the customer's defense mechanisms as a personal insult.
They do. They even use derogatory slang for them. In Girard's specific era and world, the common term was the mooch.
Right. The amateur, insecure salesperson looks at a defensive customer and thinks this person is here to waste my time, to lie to me, to grind me down, and to try and steal my commission by getting something for nothing.
It becomes a gladiator match. But Girard, having done the work to secure his own psychological foundation, refuses to take that skepticism personally. He actively validates the customer's fear.
He demands that you, as the professional, look at them as exhausted human beings who work incredibly hard for every dollar they earn.
He paints a really vivid picture of the stakes for them. He reminds the reader that the money this person is terrified of parting with, it's money they will no longer have for the other vital areas of their life.
Right, if they buy this car, they might have to downgrade their groceries or delay buying new shoes for their kids or cancel a family vacation.
Yeah.
The financial and emotional stakes are massive for the buyer.
They are completely terrified of making a catastrophic mistake. They are terrified of being taken advantage of and looking foolish to their spouse. So naturally, they put up a massive, spiked wall of hostility, indifference, and suspicion.
Of course they do.
Now, if you return that hostility, if your internal insecurities flare up and you go to war against the customer, you might occasionally bully or manipulate a weak prospect into a sale. But you will breed deep resentment, and they will never, ever return.
Girard argues that the true victory in this bloodless war is the systematic dismantling of their fear. Your enemy is their anxiety.
Yes.
When you successfully conquer that anxiety through empathy, transparency, and competence, a beautiful thing happens. The customer wins the reliable product they desperately need, and you win the financial commission and, crucially, their genuine friendship.
There are zero casualties. Both parties walk away from the battlefield feeling victorious.
I do want to push on the mechanics of that, though, because it's a great theory, but how does recognizing their financial terror actually change your physical pitch on the floor? It's one thing to have empathy in your heart, but how does it manifest in the actual transaction?
It manifests in patience and validation. Instead of immediately attacking their objections with a rehearsed rebuttal, which is what a hostile combatant does, you validate the objection.
Give me an example.
Okay, so when they say the price is too high, the empathetic combatant, the one fighting the mistrust, says, I completely understand why you feel that way. It is a massive amount of money and you have a family to protect.
Oh, wow. So you lean into it.
Exactly. By acknowledging their reality, you disarm the trap they were expecting. They were expecting you to argue and justify the price. Instead, you allied with them against the problem. You use empathy as a tactical weapon to lower their heart rate.
That is a profound paradigm shift. And for anyone operating in a client-facing role, the mandate is clear. Do not take the customer's defense mechanisms personally.
They aren't attacking your character. They are frantically protecting their own livelihood.
Frame your ultimate objective, not as defeating the prospect, not as breaking down their will, but as conquering their anxiety so you can both walk away victorious.
And achieving that specific type of mutual victory, leaving the customer feeling completely secure, respected, and satisfied in their purchase, it is the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for the final and most powerful concept in this chapter. Because if you truly win that bloodless war, the way Girard describes, the relationship does not terminate when the ink dries on the contract.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the ultimate evolution of the professional, the shift from the exhausted hunter to the wealthy farmer. Girard introduces the concept of the continuous harvest.
The farming system.
Right. He systematically dismantles the amateur idea that selling is a localized, finite event. It is not an isolated transaction that ends the moment the customer walks out the door. It is a continuous, perpetually regenerating ecosystem.
And he uses this great analogy of farming in a miraculous climate where crops can grow all year round. You plant a seed, you meticulously tend to it, you harvest the crop, and the exact moment you pull that crop from the soil, you plant the next seed in the very same hole.
But to fully appreciate the continuous harvest, we have to examine the trap that most salespeople fall into, which Girard highlights through what we can call the taillight fallacy.
Ah, the taillight fallacy. That is such a brutal reality check for anyone in sales.
It really is. The taillight fallacy is this pervasive amateur belief that the sale is officially over the exact second you see the customer's taillights driving off the lot.
The mentality is, I got their money, the paperwork is filed, I am wiping my hands clean, on to the next fresh lead.
But I have to admit, human nature makes that fallacy incredibly tempting.
Oh, totally.
Think about the fatigue. If you have just spent 4 grueling hours on the showroom floor, battling mistrust, haggling over interest rates on a station wagon, your brain is screaming for relief. You want to go to the break room and turn your brain off. How does someone fight that overwhelming fatigue to immediately start planting again?
Well, fighting that fatigue requires understanding the horrifying alternative. If you succumb to the taillight fallacy, you remain a hunter.
And the fundamental problem with being a hunter is that you can only eat what you manage to kill that specific day.
Exactly. What happens when a drought hits? What happens when the migration patterns change? Or, in business terms, what happens when the economy turns hostile? The hunter starves.
Girard fought the fatigue of the individual sale by focusing on the terror of potential starvation.
Let's look at the audited data the text provides. By treating the immediate post-sale period not as a finish line, but as the critical pre-sale period for the next transaction, Girard reached a point where roughly 60% of his staggering volume 6 out of every 10 sales were to repeat customers or direct personal referrals.
I need to highlight how statistically absurd that is. We are talking about the retail car business in the 1960s.
Right.
This is an industry where a standard consumer only buys a new vehicle every 3, 4, or maybe 5 years. To maintain a 60% repeat and referral rate on a product with a half-decade buying cycle is almost mathematically incomprehensible.
It is. And the logistical mechanics of how he managed this farm in 1966 are fascinating. Because we have to remember, there was no Salesforce.
No automated email drip champagnes.
No digital CRM platforms. This was entirely analog.
So how did he do it?
Girard managed this continuous harvest using thousands upon thousands of physical index cards. He employed a small army of assistants just to help him handwrite and mail out personalized greeting cards. He sent a card for every conceivable occasion, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. And he didn't just put his business card in an envelope. He sent a message that essentially said, "I like you."
But why does that work? I mean, why does receiving a piece of mail from a guy who sold you a car 3 years ago actually result in a guaranteed future sale?
It operates on 2 really powerful psychological principles: the law of reciprocity and top-of-mind awareness. When someone consistently remembers you, celebrates your milestones, and asks for nothing in return in that specific moment, it builds a subtle but powerful psychological debt.
That makes total sense.
More importantly, when that customer's car inevitably breaks down 3 years later, or their neighbor mentions, they're looking for a new vehicle, who is the very first person that pops into their head.
The guy who has been sending them a warm, friendly card every single month for 36 months.
Exactly. They don't even consider shopping anywhere else. The result of that massive analog farming system is ultimate bulletproof security.
And the text notes that during severe economic downturns, recessions, massive auto plant layoffs, the infamous long strikes in Detroit that paralyzed the city, when other salespeople were literally starving because walk-in traffic completely dried up, Girard's sales didn't just hold steady.
No, they actually went up 10 to 20%.
That is the ultimate proof of concept right there.
Mm-hmm.
But let me play devil's advocate for the listener who might be in a highly specialized field.
Okay.
Let's say you are listening right now, and you sell something that people truly only buy once a decade or maybe even once in a lifetime.
Like what?
Say you sell specialized, multi-million-dollar industrial manufacturing equipment, or you are a high-end custom home architect. Does this intensive farming system still apply when the repeat purchase cycle is potentially longer than your career?
It applies absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And one could argue it is even more critical in those low-volume, high-ticket industries.
Really?
How so? Because even if that specific individual never buys from you again for the rest of their life, the friendship and trust you cultivated yields the most valuable currency in business, which is referrals.
The network effect.
Exactly. Girard hints at this mechanism when he teases his famous law of 250, which he explores deeper later in the book. The harvest you're reaping isn't just the individual buyer. It is the buyer's entire extended network.
Every single person they know who might eventually need your specialized product is a potential seed planted by that initial trusting transaction.
If you treat them right, if you win the bloodless war, and if you consistently stay in touch, they become a bird dog for you. They actively do the hunting on your behalf.
They become your external sales force, fiercely defending your reputation in rooms you aren't even in.
Exactly.
So the practical operational takeaway here is absolute. Never, under any circumstances, treat the signing of a contract as a finish line. The exact moment the money changes hands is actually the breaking of the soil for the next seed.
You must build rigorous systems, whether that's leveraging modern CRM software, sending handwritten notes, or scheduling quarterly check-ins to nurture that relationship continuously. It requires immense, unglamorous discipline.
It requires you to elevate your view of your own profession. You must stop viewing your career as a frantic series of quick, isolated hits and start viewing it as a long-term, compounding investment portfolio.
You aren't just making a living, you are building an impregnable asset.
Let's pull all of these massive concepts together and synthesize exactly what Girard is trying to teach us in this opening chapter. We've navigated the stark difference between the pace car spectator and the bleeding frontline pro.
Right.
We've torn down the rotting foundation of empty mere affirmations. We've walked the hostile battlefield of the bloodless war, and we've mapped out the continuous analog harvest. If we distill all of this down, what is the core beating heart of this philosophy?
The ultimate insight here is a total redefinition of what it means to be great at sales. True mastery of this craft has absolutely nothing to do with slick, manipulative verbal tricks, superficial positive thinking, or viewing the consumer as prey to be hunted.
It is a rigorous, deeply honest, and psychologically taxing profession.
It demands that you violently confront your own internal flaws and childhood traumas first, so that you can stand grounded in front of a terrified customer and genuinely respect the gravity of their hard-earned money.
It's about allying with the customer to fight their fear, rather than fighting the customer for their wallet.
And once you prove your integrity and win that trust, you possess the discipline to systematically build a farm of relationships that will insulate you from any economic disaster.
It is a profound evolution, and we now know that the system works. We've seen the audited numbers, the Guinness record, the sheer volume of his success, and the deep philosophy behind it. But a massive question remains.
It's a huge one.
How exactly does a man who spent the first 35 years of his life as a traumatized, bankrupt, self-proclaimed world's biggest loser suddenly flip the switch to become the greatest in the world? What is the catalyst for that kind of unprecedented transformation? We will uncover the specific moment of pure, terrifying desperation that changed his life forever in our next dive into the book.
It is a turning point that will force you to completely redefine everything you think you know about human motivation and the true origin of drive.
Until then, look at your own daily routine and ask yourself a very hard question. Are you currently waking up every morning just hunting for your next immediate win, or are you putting in the unglamorous work to plant the seeds for a harvest you can reap for the rest of your life?
What if the absolute greatest secret to unimaginable success isn't, some fancy degree or a perfect childhood, but hitting a rock bottom so profound that you literally have to sneak into your own house just to avoid the repo man?
It completely shatters the traditional narrative we're always sold, right? About how highly successful people are built.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, we tend to think of success as this really clean, linear path of just making good choices. Like, go to the right school, meet the right mentors, make the right investment.
Highlight reel, basically.
Right, the highlight reel. But sometimes, and we see this a lot, the absolute strongest steel is forged in the darkest, most desperate corners of human experience.
It really is. So today we are taking a deep dive into Chapter 2, The End of a Loser, the Beginning of the Winner, to really uncover the gritty, painful, and just ultimately triumphant origin story of the world's greatest salesman.
It's quite a story.
It's unbelievable. You're going to learn how profound failure and psychological trauma can actually be reverse engineered into an unstoppable drive.
Yes.
And, why understanding your own rock bottom is probably the most crucial business asset for any entrepreneur.
It really is. It's a phenomenal case study in human resilience because we're dissecting exactly how massive liabilities, the kind that would literally break most people, were converted into the ultimate entrepreneurial assets.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand how this happens, we can't just look at the end result, right?
Yeah.
We have to ground ourselves in the reality of the time and place where this entire story starts.
The context is everything here.
It really is. So I want to paint a picture for you. We are in Detroit. It's around 1928, specifically the Lower East Side.
Right.
And we really need to strip away any of those romanticized notions of the Roaring Twenties or, a comfortable suburban upbringing.
Yeah.
This is the absolute precipice of the Great Depression.
It's bleak. I mean, the socioeconomic landscape here is absolutely critical to understand because it sets the baseline for everything that follows. Detroit at that time was this massive industrial powerhouse, right? The beating heart of American manufacturing. But it was incredibly unforgiving to those at the very bottom of the economic ladder.
Oh, brutal. Especially if you were an immigrant.
Exactly. If you were a new immigrant, and particularly a Sicilian immigrant in this specific era, you were walking into a wall of intense, overt discrimination.
Right. The source material goes into painful detail about this.
Yeah.
He was constantly subjected to casual, vicious ethnic slurs right in the street.
Yeah.
Being called wop, dago, greaser. It wasn't a rare occurrence, It was just the ambient noise of his childhood.
Which is just heartbreaking. It was a society that aggressively communicated to him from day one that he was an outsider.
Like he didn't belong at all.
Exactly, that he was lesser than.
Yeah.
And when you're a child absorbing that kind of societal hostility, it immediately puts you on the defensive. Your baseline state just becomes one of hypervigilance.
And the physical conditions of his childhood were just as punishing as the social ones.
Right.
I mean, he paints this incredibly vivid, almost visceral picture of living in an upper flat of a two-family house.
Oh, the house across from the coal yard.
Yes, right across the street from this massive coal yard. Now, if you have never experienced a Detroit winter, they are notoriously brutal.
Freezing.
The wind comes off the lakes and just cuts right through you. And this house was freezing. They had no heat.
Survival wasn't a metaphor here. It was a daily biological imperative.
Literally. To keep the family from freezing to death, he and his older brother Jim, they had to learn how to navigate that coal yard.
Which was dangerous.
Very. They would wait for the cover of dark, right? And they'd crawl under the perimeter fence and quietly throw heavy, sharp hunks of coal into these rough burlap bags.
As little kids.
As kids. Then they had to drag these massive bags back under the fence, haul them across the freezing street, and feed them into the cellar furnace. This wasn't like some fun childhood adventure. This was a matter of basic winter survival.
I want to pause on that image for a second because you really have to think about the mindset that instills in a developing brain.
Yeah, what does that do to a kid?
Well, when you are a kid sneaking into a coal yard in the freezing cold, just so your family doesn't freeze, you are learning early on that the world is a cold, hostile place.
Right.
And that survival sometimes requires breaking the rules. Stealing that coal wasn't a malicious act of delinquency.
No, not at all.
It wasn't about thrill seeking. It was literally the only logical choice available to him.
Because the margins for error were essentially zero. If you don't steal the coal, you freeze.
Precisely. And yet, what's truly tragic about this story is that the hostility of the outside world, the freezing cold, the discrimination, the poverty, that actually paled in comparison to what was waiting for him inside that house.
It's just horrifying to think about.
Specifically down in that exact same cellar where they had to feed the furnace.
Right. Which brings us to the core psychological hurdle he had to overcome. And honestly, this part of the source materials is genuinely hard to process.
Really is.
Because this wasn't just a story of economic poverty. It was a story of deep, systematic, psychological, and physical abuse.
Yeah.
The concept of being a loser wasn't something he just picked up on the streets. It was actively, intentionally programmed into him by the ultimate authority figure in any child's life, his own father.
This is a textbook tragic example of the self-fulfilling prophecy in childhood development.
Break that down for us. How does that work?
Well, in psychology, there's a well-documented phenomenon regarding how children process information from their primary caregivers. Children simply do not possess the cognitive architecture to objectively evaluate the statements made by their parents.
Meaning if a parent says something, the kid just takes it as gospel.
Exactly. When an absolute authority figure repeatedly tells a child they are worthless, the child does not have the capacity to step back and think, oh, my father is projecting his own unhealed trauma onto me.
Right. A kid can't psychoanalyze their dad.
No, they can't say, my father is struggling with the economic pressures of the Depression and lashing out. Instead, the child internalizes that abusive statement as an objective, undeniable fact of the universe.
Wow.
It becomes their foundational truth. They build their entire emerging identity around it. And this is the crucial part for anyone trying to understand human behavior. They subconsciously begin to align their actions to ensure they fulfill that identity.
So they sabotage themselves to prove the authority figure right.
Yes. They become what they are told they are.
And the details he shares about this abuse are just harrowing. I mean, his father would take him down to that same cellar, the same place they kept the stolen coal to survive, and beat him relentlessly.
It's awful.
And while the physical abuse was severe, the source makes it clear that the verbal abuse left the deepest, most permanent scars. His father constantly told him he was a bum, that he was no good,
Yeah.
and specifically that he would inevitably end up in Jacktown.
Which was the local slang for the state prison in Jackson, Michigan.
Right. Just think about that. He wasn't just being told he was bad. He was literally being handed a roadmap to failure by his father.
Yeah, a specific destination.
His father was pointing at a state penitentiary and saying, that is your destiny.
To really grasp the dynamics of this cellar, we have to look at the father's background. And, not to excuse the monstrous behavior, but to understand the mechanics of generational trauma.
Right. Where did this come from?
The father was an uneducated, incredibly poor immigrant from Sicily. The source notes he was practically illiterate. But more importantly, the father himself had been raised by a tyrannical, deeply abusive father.
Oh, wow.
He was simply executing the only parenting algorithm he had ever been exposed to.
It's that tragic cycle. Hurt people, hurt people.
And it was compounded by the environment inside that specific two-family house. The father was locked in a bitter, ongoing, vicious feud with the boy's grandmother.
Right, who lived there too.
Exactly. And the grandmother, who was the mother of his teenage bride, by the way, lived right in the house with them.
Which adds a whole other layer of instability. Because, his mother was only 15 when she married his father.
Think about that.
The emotional immaturity in that household must have been staggering.
Utterly staggering. And here is where the heartbreak really sets in a bit. The boy actually loved his grandmother. She was one of the few sources of warmth in his life.
Yeah, he just wanted some affection.
He would secretly visit her. Because they lived in this partitioned two-family setup, he would sometimes just talk to her through a thin partition in the cellar.
Oh, wow.
But whenever his father found out about these secret visits with his perceived enemy, the beatings and the screaming would escalate to terrifying levels.
So the child was essentially being violently punished for showing love, for seeking basic human affection.
Yes, he was being taught that seeking love leads directly to pain.
But I'm genuinely stuck here, and I want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because when you read a story like this, where the father is so monstrously abusive, the logical assumption is that the kid would just hate him, that he would completely reject the father and everything he stood for. But you see this pattern throughout the source material, even much later in his life, where he almost desperately wants his father to be proud of him.
Yeah, it's very prominent.
So if the trauma was so severe, why did he keep seeking that man's approval? We always hear that tough childhoods create resilient, tough adults. Didn't this abuse just make him stronger?
Well, what's fascinating here is that is the great myth of trauma, that it cleanly and neatly creates strength.
It doesn't.
No, it rarely creates a simple, straightforward drive for success. Instead, extreme abuse creates this profound psychological dualism. It creates two conflicting, incredibly powerful forces that are constantly at war within the individual.
Like a split personality.
Not quite a split personality, but a split motivation. On one hand, because of what we discussed about internalization, you have a deep-seated belief of absolute worthlessness.
Right, the I'm a bum programming.
At his core, the child believes he is garbage. He believes he belongs in Jacktown. But on the other hand, because humans are fundamentally wired to seek the love of their parents, you have this wild, burning, almost feral anger.
Wow.
It's a desperate, exhausting need to prove the abuser wrong, and paradoxically, by proving them wrong, to finally win their love and respect.
It's like trying to drive a car with one foot slamming on the gas pedal and the other foot completely jammed down on the emergency brake.
That is exactly what it is. The engine is roaring, there's a ton of energy being expended, but the machine is tearing itself apart.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And if we extrapolate this to the modern business landscape, which I think is crucial for anyone listening to this deep dive, we see this exact dynamic playing out in boardrooms every single day.
Really? You mean entrepreneurs driven by trauma?
Absolutely. I call them ghosts in the boardroom. Many highly driven, intensely successful people carry the subconscious voices of past critics.
Like,
it could be an abusive parent, a dismissive high school teacher, a toxic early boss who told them they'd never amount to anything.
right.
These ghosts drive them to massive world-changing success because they are running as fast as they can, away from that feeling of worthlessness.
They're running from the ghost.
Exactly. But because the core belief hasn't been resolved, they often engage in catastrophic self-sabotage just when they reach the pinnacle. Their internal programming suddenly whispers, "You don't deserve this, remember? You're a bum."
Oh, man.
And they blow the deal, or they destroy the company culture, or they just burn out completely.
You know, it almost feels like a computer virus running quietly in the background of your operating system.
I like that.
You can upgrade your hardware, you can buy a nicer suit, you can open all the shiny new applications you want, you can learn all the latest marketing tactics and management strategies. But until you run a deep diagnostic, isolate that original virus, and actively delete it, the system will eventually crash. The virus is programmed to destroy the host, no matter how good the rest of the system looks on the surface.
That is a brilliant analogy, because a virus doesn't announce itself until the system fails.
Right.
So for anyone listening right now, if you want to succeed in business or in any high-performance field, you absolutely must audit your internal monologue.
You have to know what's driving you.
You have to sit down in a quiet room and rigorously, honestly identify your motivations. Ask yourself, which of my business decisions are being driven by genuine objective market strategy, and which decisions are simply subconscious attempts to prove a toxic authority fickle from my past wrong?
That's powerful. Because if you are building a multi-million-dollar company just to show your father you aren't a bum, you are building your entire house on an emotional fault line.
And when the earthquake comes, and in business it always does, that foundation will shatter.
It is exhausting just thinking about carrying that kind of psychological weight, especially at such a young age.
Yes.
But here's the thing about this story. He didn't just stay down in that cellar. He had to go out into the world. And that brings us to the incredibly gritty origins of his salesmanship and how raw survival instinct accidentally taught him the fundamental laws of human behavior.
This is one of the most fascinating transitions in the text.
I agree.
When you are operating at the absolute base level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, meaning you are literally just trying to secure food and shelter for the day, you learn certain realities about human nature very quickly.
You don't have time for theory.
Exactly. You don't have the luxury of theory. You only have what works.
And the hustle started so early. We're talking 8 years old.
Unbelievable.
At 8 years old, he builds himself a shoe shine box and starts working the streets of Detroit. And again, we have to look at the environment. This was not a cute kid setting up a lemonade stand in a quiet, safe cul-de-sac where the neighbors buy a cup just to be nice.
Not at all.
He was working the working men's bars along East Jefferson Avenue. These were rough places right outside massive industrial factories like U.S. Rubber and the local stove company.
He was voluntarily walking into a highly volatile adult environment. Remember the context we talked about earlier? This is the 1930s.
The Depression.
The Great Depression is hollowing out the country. There are vastly more workers standing outside the gates than there are jobs inside. The men inside these bars were exhausted from brutal physical labor. They were terrified of losing their jobs the next morning, and they were drinking heavily to cope with that anxiety.
So you have an 8-year-old kid who has to learn how to navigate a loud, smoky room full of stressed, unpredictable adults whose moods are entirely dictated by cheap alcohol and severe economic fear.
The situational awareness required to survive that room is staggering. He had to become a master observer.
And the mechanics of the hustle itself are just fascinating to me. He describes squatting on the filthy, sawdust-covered floors of these saloons, practically begging for a nickel a shine. And if times were really tough and nobody had a nickel, he'd take 2 cents. But he wasn't just working hard. He was already, intuitively, learning how to create a spectacle to increase his margins.
He understood that the service itself, the shiny shoes, was only part of the transaction.
Exactly. He developed these tricky little moves. He would toss his brushes high in the air, catch them, change hands incredibly fast, snapping the rag he was putting on a show.
Entertainment.
Right. And what happened? The men in the bar got to know him. They liked the entertainment. It broke up the misery of their day. So they started tossing him extra pennies as tips.
Then those pennies mattered.
Oh, absolutely. In the 1930s, an extra penny or two was massive. It meant he could buy a quart of milk or a double-dip ice cream cone. It was tangible, immediate feedback on his performance. The better the show, the more calories he got to consume.
He was inadvertently learning the art of the pitch. But far more importantly, he was learning how to read people at a micro level.
How so?
Well, when you are shining shoes in a neighborhood bar, You see the exact same men multiple times a day, every day. You see them when they walk in sober and anxious, and you see them 3 or 4 drinks in.
Right. Their whole demeanor changes.
He learned how to instantly assess a stranger's emotional state. He learned how to read subtle body language.
He had to know if a guy was going to be generous because the booze made him happy, or if the booze had turned him mean and aggressive, meaning he needed to pack up his box and run.
Precisely. That early enforced exposure to erratic human behavior became an unparalleled masterclass in reading prospects. He developed an emotional radar that you simply cannot teach in a corporate sales seminar.
But the real breakthrough, the moment where the underlying mathematics of sales really clicked for him, came a little later.
The newspaper route.
Yes, when he got a newspaper route for the Detroit Free Press. Specifically, there was a contest the paper was running to get new subscribers. And the prize wasn't money. It was a case of Pepsi Cola.
A huge deal.
24 12-ounce bottles of soda. Now, for a kid who was literally surviving on plain, boiled spaghetti and the coal he stole, a massive case of sugar and caffeine was the holy grail. It was the ultimate incentive.
And look at his methodology. Look at how he approached winning that contest. It wasn't about charm, and it wasn't about finesse.
No.
It was about raw, unrelenting, unapologetic volume.
He knocked on every single door.
Yeah.
Every apartment building, on every single street he could physically walk to. He rang doorbells until the pads of his fingers were sore.
The dedication.
The text says he even skipped school just to maximize his daylight knocking time. He was completely obsessed.
Because the incentive was so clear and the path to get it was purely mathematical.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. He was intuitively executing what modern tech companies today call A/B testing, or what inside sales teams call a pure cold calling gauntlet.
Yes, exactly.
He discovered the fundamental law of numbers. He realized that every time a door slammed in his face, every time someone yelled no and chased him off the porch, it wasn't a personal rejection.
It was just data.
Right, it was just a statistical data point. It was a mathematical necessity that brought him one step closer to the inevitable yes. He figured out that if he just kept moving his feet and pushing the doorbell, the law of averages would eventually bend to his will.
That is the core revelation of his early life. The newspaper contest taught him that rejection is not fatal.
Most people are terrified of rejection.
They are. But we have to view this through the lens of his trauma. For a kid who was told every single day by his towering, terrifying father that he was a worthless loser, having some random stranger in an apartment say no thanks to a newspaper subscription didn't hurt at all.
Right, it's nothing compared to the seller.
Exactly. His baseline for emotional pain was so high that a sales rejection didn't even register.
Yeah.
He developed an incredibly thick skin.
The worst they could say was no. They weren't going to drag him downstairs and beat him.
Exactly. He learned that persistence absolutely guarantees conversion over a long enough timeline.
And it worked.
It did. And what was the result? He won the contest so many times he filled his family's garage with cases of Pepsi. And then, showing that pure entrepreneurial instinct, he flipped the prize. He sold the bottles of Pepsi to the neighborhood kids, bringing even more hard cash home.
You know, it's funny. People spend thousands of dollars on sales courses today to learn exactly that.
They do.
It's an incredible lesson for anyone listening. Rejection is just a stepping stone. It is not a dead end. In entrepreneurship, in freelance work, in any competitive endeavor, pure volume and unyielding persistence will very often beat raw, unpolished talent.
100%.
If you are sitting around at your desk waiting for the perfect pitch, or waiting for the warmest, easiest lead to fall into your lap, you're going to starve. If you want more yeses, you simply have to be willing to knock on more doors until your knuckles bleed.
It completely demystifies the toxic idea of the born salesman. Society loves the myth of the person born with a silver tongue who can charm anyone into anything. He wasn't born with a silver tongue. He was born into a situation where he had to hustle to eat. And the math of the hustle eventually revealed itself to him through sheer repetition.
But, you know, just as he's figuring out these incredible skills, this upward trajectory takes a very dark, dangerous turn.
Yes, it does.
Despite learning all these valuable lessons about hard work and the law of averages, his damaged self-worth, that computer virus we talked about earlier, drags him down a highly destructive path. He starts looking for the shortcut.
This is where we see the self-fulfilling prophecy really take the wheel.
Okay, tell us about that.
We discussed earlier that when a person's foundational identity is built on a belief of worthlessness, they inevitably seek validation through destructive means. They fundamentally do not believe they are capable of authentic, sustained success.
So doing things the right way feels wrong to them.
Exactly. The idea of climbing the ladder slowly feels impossible to them. So they look for the hack, the scam, the easy way out. They look for situations that match their internal view of themselves as a bad person.
And the source chronicles this escalating series of teenage delinquency. And it's chaotic. I mean, he's constantly getting thrown out of the house by his father. He's sleeping in abandoned boxcars in the freezing rail yards.
So dangerous.
He talks about renting a bed in these terrifying diamond-night flop houses filled with desperate drunks and transients. And then at age 16, he crosses a major uncrossable line.
The escalation from survival crime to felony crime.
Right. He's hanging out on a corner, and two older neighborhood guys invite him to help rob a bar. And it wasn't just any bar. It was a bar on Mildrum and Lafayette, which was actually one of the very same working men's bars where he used to shine shoes.
Notice the psychological progression there.
Yeah.
He goes from a legitimate, albeit grueling, hustle shining shoes on his hands and knees for pennies to actively exploiting his intimate knowledge of that exact same environment for a criminal shortcut.
Because he knows the layout.
He knows the layout, he knows the owner, and he uses that knowledge to steal.
The details of the robbery are straight out of a noir film. They go to the Whittier Hotel garage and steal a Studebaker. He remembers the garage attendants screaming at them as they tear out into the street.
Adrenaline pumping.
They park near the bar, wait in the dark until 3:30 in the morning, pry open a bathroom window, and break in. They load the stolen Studebaker with heavy cases of liquor and physically rip the cash register till right out of the counter.
Wow.
His cut of the cash was about $60, plus whatever money they made selling the stolen booze for $1 a bottle on the street corner. Now, to a 16-year-old kid in the 1940s, $60 was a massive, unimaginable windfall. It felt like easy money.
But the reality of easy money, and this is a universal truth in business and in life, is that it always, always comes with a delayed, hidden, and compounding cost.
You never get away with it cleanly.
Never.
And the bill came due months later. Completely unexpectedly, long after he thought he got away with it, the police burst into his bedroom.
Just like that.
One of his accomplices had been caught on an entirely different job and immediately gave up his name to save himself. He is dragged out of his house in front of his family, taken to the station, interrogated, and thrown into a juvenile detention center.
That abrupt shift from feeling like a criminal mastermind to being a terrified kid in a cell is a brutal wake-up call.
He describes that night in juvenile lockup as the single most terrifying night of his entire life. He talks about a giant guard slowly patrolling the cell block, slapping a heavy leather strap against his hand.
Just the sound of it.
The visceral terror of that sound echoing in the dark. The next morning, the police make him face the owner of the bar. He robbed the man who used to let him shine shoes in his establishment.
Oh, the shame.
He has to look him in the eye, apologize, and promise to pay back every cent. And mercifully, the owner looks at this terrified 16-year-old and decides to drop the charges.
He got incredibly lucky.
But the damage at home was done. His father and uncle come to pick him up from the police station, and as soon as he is in the car, his father beats him relentlessly, screaming about the incredible shame he brought to the family name.
And we really have to look at the psychology of the father in that exact moment.
What was the father thinking?
Well, for the father, getting that phone call from the police station was the ultimate twisted validation. The father finally had objective, undeniable proof that his son was exactly what he always told him he was.
I was right all along.
He could point and say, "See, I told you. You're a bum. You're a criminal. You're a loser, destined for Jacktown."
Now, you would think that sitting in a cell listening to a guard with a leather strap would scare anybody straight.
You would hope so.
You'd think he'd completely change his life after that near miss. But instead, he embarks on this wild, chaotic string of over 40 different jobs, and he fails at almost all of them.
40 jobs.
He's mixing cement, driving delivery trucks. He gets broomed, which was the factory slang for getting swept out the door like garbage from the stove company because he got caught smoking on the factory floor.
Self-sabotage again.
He works the brutal assembly line at Hudson Motor Car. He takes a job in an electroplating factory, standing over vats of boiling acid and breathing in molten metal fumes, which literally leaves him with a lifelong case of asthma.
He is bouncing from one brutal environment to another, never finding a real foothold.
It wasn't just tough factory jobs. He gets a job as a bellhop at the upscale book Cadillac Hotel, wearing a nice uniform.
A good job.
And how does he lose it? He literally gets fired for throwing important telegrams into the trash instead of delivering them to the guests' rooms, simply because he was tired of walking up and down the stairs.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is a staggering level of self-destruction. Throwing away telegrams is an active choice to fail.
And this whole cycle culminates in 1948. He decides to become an entrepreneur. He opens a hat cleaning and shoe shine shop in his old neighborhood. But the storefront is entirely a front. The real business, the real money, is happening in the back room. Illegal blackjack and dice games.
Of course.
They think they are so smart. They have a foolproof system, a lookout at the door, a secret buzzer signal. But one day, a guy walks in. It's an old friend from his junior high days.
Oh, no.
They slap him on the back, welcome him in, and let him right into the secret back room, completely oblivious to the fact that this old friend from middle school is now an undercover vice cop.
Wow.
Place is immediately raided. The cops hand them a massive stack of loitering tickets that drain all their cash to pay off, and the entire gambling operation is destroyed in an hour.
It's just a spectacular collapse.
I have to pause here because I am genuinely stuck on this pattern. It seems like every single time this guy got a little bit of traction, whether it was landing a clean job at a nice hotel or even running a highly profitable, albeit illegal, operation, he blew it. He threw away telegrams. He let a cop walk right into his illegal casino without checking. Was he just a victim of terrible circumstance and exceptionally bad luck, or was he actively, intentionally self-destructing?
It is not bad luck. If we connect this chaotic timeline to the bigger psychological picture we drew earlier, this is a textbook, undeniable case of active self-sabotage.
So he was doing it on purpose.
Subconsciously, yes. He was subconsciously acting rotten to prove his father right.
The computer virus is executing its code.
Exactly. When your core identity is built around the belief that you are fundamentally a bad, worthless person, you will unconsciously arrange your life circumstances to reflect and validate that reality.
That's so tragic.
The allure of the gambling den, the thrill of the bar robbery, the laziness at the hotel, it was all the mirage of easy money, yes, but it was also a subconscious way to fulfill his destiny as a loser.
He couldn't handle success.
He was terrified of actual, sustained, legitimate success because it heavily conflicted with his core identity. If he succeeded, it meant his father was wrong, which meant his entire worldview would collapse. So he threw away the telegrams, he let the cop in.
You know, it reminds me of a real estate analogy. It's like deciding to build a massive opulent mansion on top of a known sinkhole.
Oh, that's good.
You can use the most expensive imported marble. You can hire the best architects. You can make the house look incredibly impressive to all your neighbors for a week or two.
Sure.
But because the foundation beneath the dirt is fundamentally hollow, the collapse isn't just a possibility. It is a geological inevitability. The easy money and the quick scams are the mansion. The damaged self-worth is the sinkhole.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And the practical application here is absolutely vital for anyone listening who is building a career, a startup, or a small business.
Beware the shortcut.
You have to beware the shortcut. Whenever a business opportunity presents itself that promises an exceptionally high financial reward for zero ethical effort, you must train yourself to recognize it as a trap.
There's always the catch.
True. Sustainable entrepreneurial success cannot be built on scams, growth hacks that exploit people, or skimming the system. It requires a bedrock of genuine value creation. Authentic success requires an authentic foundation.
Yeah.
If you try to skip pouring the foundation, the collapse is just waiting for you in the future.
So after the gambling ring gets busted and he loses all that money, he finally realizes the criminal path is literally going to end with him dead or in jack camp.
It's a wall.
He is finally ready to play by the rules. He pivots to legitimate work. But here's the tragic irony of this story. The street smarts that kept him alive in boxcars and illegal gambling dens completely fail him the second he puts on a suit and walks into a corporate environment.
Yes.
Which brings us to the immense, devastating danger of blind trust in business.
He makes a transition from street smart survival to corporate vulnerability, and the learning curve is just brutal. It starts well, though. He gets a job with a man named Abe Saperstein.
Let's talk about Abe. Abe Saperstein was a small-scale, independent home builder in Detroit. We aren't talking about a massive developer building huge suburban subdivisions. Saperstein was buying individual vacant lots and building cheap, basic single-family houses, one or two at a time.
Very grassroots.
And he initially hired our subject as just a common day laborer, driving the heavy trucks, hauling lumber, mixing cement by hand.
But this job was different from the 40 jobs he had before.
How so?
He stayed.
He did stay, and a big reason he stayed was Saperstein himself. Saperstein treated him decently. He treated him with respect, almost like a surrogate son.
Which he desperately needed.
Right. And over time, he learned the building trade inside and out. From the foundation to the roof, he understood how a house went together. During this period, he finally finds a real measure of stability.
Things are looking up.
He is married to his wife, June. They start having kids. He's building a real life. And eventually, when Saperstein gets older and decides to retire, he actually turns his entire tiny operation over to him.
A huge opportunity.
Massive. Now, it wasn't a massive corporation. He basically inherited an old, beat-up truck, a cement mixer, and some hand tools. But it was a real, legitimate, functioning business. For a decade, he works hard, he stays completely out of trouble, and he builds a decent, honest living for his growing family.
But then comes the classic entrepreneurial itch, the desire to scale up.
Right. He looks at his business model and realizes that building houses one by one, scattered across different neighborhoods, is incredibly inefficient.
It doesn't scale well.
No. He thinks if I could just buy a massive tract of undeveloped land and build 50 houses all at once, I could achieve massive economies of scale. I could buy lumber and materials cheaper in bulk, I could schedule subcontractors much more efficiently, and I could exponentially increase my profit margins.
It's the dream of every small business owner.
It is.
The logic is sound, but the execution requires stepping into a much larger, much more dangerous arena.
So he goes looking for land, and he finds what looks like the perfect parcel. It's in a suburb northeast of Detroit, a place called Mount Clemens. It's exactly what he needs, and it's cheap.
Too cheap.
But it's cheap for a very specific reason. It is completely undeveloped farmland. Specifically, it has no city sewers hooked up to it. And in the Detroit real estate market at that time, in the post-war boom, buyers absolutely refused to purchase new homes that relied on septic tanks.
People wanted modern city plumbing. It was a total deal breaker.
So what happens?
This is the critical pivot point of his entire adult life. He sees the red flag, he knows sewers are a deal breaker, so he raises this exact concern with the smooth-talking real estate salesman who is pushing the land contract.
And the salesman gives him a classic, devastating insider tip hustle.
Right. The salesman leans in, probably drops his voice, and says, "Look, don't worry about the sewers. I was just down at City Hall this morning, and the word is they are bringing city sewers out to this exact tract of land this spring. The plans are already drawn up.
Oh, man.
But listen, just don't tell anyone, because the city doesn't want to start a massive land speculation rush before the pipes are in the ground."
It's the perfect con. It makes the mark feel special, like they are getting in on a secret floor of a massive opportunity.
And he buys it.
He buys it hook, line, and sinker. After everything he survived on the streets, he signs a massive land contract at a punishingly high interest rate based purely on this guy's word.
Just a verbal promise.
He immediately pours all of his available cash into building the first beautiful model home on the lot, heavily relying on short-term, high-interest credit from his building suppliers to get it finished. And then he waits.
The waiting is the worst part.
He spends his weekend sitting in the finished model home, and lots of potential buyers show up. The post-war housing boom is real. The price of the house is right, the layout looks great, the young couples love it. But every single buyer asks the exact same question.
Are there city sewers?
Exactly. And what does he tell them?
He repeats the salesman's lie. He says, "Don't worry, the city is bringing them out in just a few months."
Oh, man.
And the buyers politely nod and say, "Great, give us a call when the pipes are actually in the ground and we'll sign the papers."
So what does this all mean? He waits, and he waits. And the spring thaw comes, and the sewers never arrive.
Never.
The short-term credit he used to build the house quickly matures into crushing long-term debt. The interest is compounding. Finally, desperate, he drives down to City Hall himself to ask the planning department about the sewer project.
And what do they tell him?
The officials look at him like he has lost his mind. There were no plans for sewers in Mount Clemens. There never were any plans for sewers. The real estate salesman had completely fabricated the entire story out of thin air just to unload a worthless piece of swampland and collect his commission.
It's a devastating realization.
It is painful just to talk about. Here's a kid who survived the brutal streets of Detroit. He survived an abusive father, violent drunken factory workers, armed robbery, and undercover police raids.
He was incredibly tough.
He possessed a level of street smarts that most of us can't even fathom. And yet, he gets completely, catastrophically conned by a guy in a nice suit with a rehearsed smile. He loses everything.
Everything.
10 years of hard, honest, backbreaking work in the sun is instantly evaporated. He plunges $60,000 into debt. Yeah, we have to pause on that number.
Yeah.
In the 1950s, $60,000 was a staggering, a life-ruining sum of money.
It's basically insurmountable.
The creditors are circling like vultures. The building suppliers are suing him. The bank is foreclosing on his personal home. It gets so bad that he has to park his car blocks away from his house and sneak through the back alleys just to avoid the repo man taking his only vehicle.
It is a total collapse of everything he built. But psychologically, when you analyze it, it makes perfect, tragic sense.
How does that make sense?
Think about his primary mentor in the legitimate business world, Abe Saperstein. Saperstein was a father figure who treated him with genuine kindness, honesty, and transparency.
Right.
This was a wonderful thing for him personally. It showed him that good men exist. But professionally, it accidentally taught him a very dangerous lesson. It taught him to trust business partners unconditionally. He conflated personal decency with business reality. He assumed the real estate salesman operated with the same moral compass as Saperstein. But the real world, the corporate world, can be utterly ruthless.
They saw him coming a mile away.
That salesman saw a young, ambitious, slightly naive builder who was desperate to expand his operation, and he ruthlessly, surgically exploited that desire.
You know, seeing him fail like that, seeing him lose a decade of work over one conversation, makes you realize how dangerous handshake deals really are.
Oh, they're lethal.
It completely changes how I view business trust.
Mm.
The takeaway here is one of the most immutable, unforgiving laws of business. Trust but verify is not just a catchy phrase you put on a motivational poster. It is a non-negotiable rule of entrepreneurship.
You have to protect yourself.
Never, ever base a massive financial expansion or any critical business decision on a verbal promise, a handshake, or the word on the street.
If someone promises you that the city sewers are coming, or that the local zoning laws are definitely changing next month, or that their Series B funding is absolutely secured, demand to see the stamped documents.
Exactly.
Demand the proof. If they cannot produce the legally binding documents, the deal does not exist in reality. It only exists in their imagination.
Blind trust in business isn't optimism. It's negligence. And that negligence brought him to the absolute rock-bottom lowest point of his entire life, which really sets the stage for the emotional climax of this story and the true meaning of finding your why.
This is where the story shifts from a tragedy of errors into a masterclass on ultimate motivation.
Let's set the scene, because it's the moment I mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive. He has just parked his car blocks away. He has snuck through the alley, climbed over his own back fence, and slipped into his own house through the back door like a common thief, all to avoid the repo man sitting out front.
He's hiding from his own life.
He is utterly, completely defeated. His decade-old business is dead. He is $60,000 in the hole. He has let down his suppliers, his family, and everyone who trusted him. He walks into the small kitchen, and his wife, June, is standing there.
Yeah.
She looks at him. She doesn't scream. She doesn't yell or berate him. She just looks at him with absolute desperation and asks the single most devastating question a provider can ever hear. What are the kids going to eat?
And he had absolutely no money to give her. Not a dime.
He spends that entire night wide awake, lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. And during that agonizing dark night of the soul, all the old programming, the computer virus we talked about, comes roaring back with a vengeance.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
The voice of his father is echoing loudly in his head. You're a bum. You're a loser. I told you that you were always going to end up with nothing. He is forced to confront the horrifying fact that at that exact moment, lying in that bed, he is the biggest loser he has ever known. His father was right.
It is the ultimate moment of psychological crisis. The ego is completely shattered.
But this is what I don't understand. It is so incredibly easy to just give up when you are $60,000 in debt and you literally cannot buy a single loaf of bread for your own children. People break under much less pressure.
Many people do.
Why didn't he just snap? Why did he walk out the door and disappear?
Yeah.
How did that quiet question from his wife not break him completely and permanently?
This raises an important question. It's a pivotal question of his life, really, and it touches on a profound point about the fundamental nature of human motivation. comes down to the psychology of duty.
Duty.
Yes. And the monumental shift from internal fixation to external responsibility. Let's look at his past. The trauma of his childhood, the beatings in the cellar, the verbal abuse, the desperate need to prove his father wrong was entirely internal.
It was all in his head.
It was an ego-driven battle taking place inside his own head. But the hunger of his children, that was entirely external. It was a biological, undeniable reality occurring in the present moment.
It's right there in front of him.
And in that dark room, the raw, immediate responsibility to his family suddenly, violently overrode a lifetime of toxic childhood programming.
The text mentions a very specific, visceral memory that flashed through his mind that night while he was staring at the ceiling. He remembered his own childhood hunger.
It all came rushing back.
He remembered sitting at a rickety table in that freezing upper flat on miles from the coal yard, eating plates of plain boiled spaghetti with absolutely no sauce day after day because they couldn't afford a can of tomatoes. He remembered the physical ache of that poverty.
Exactly. And in remembering that ache, he experienced a profound, irreversible paradigm shift. He accepted in that moment that he might actually be a loser.
He accepted it.
He surrendered his ego, but he made a vow that he absolutely refused to pass that legacy of hunger and suffering onto his innocent children.
Wow.
He refused to let his family starve just to provide final, undeniable proof to his abusive father that he was a bum. His core motivation shifted completely. It moved from ego, the desire to prove the past wrong, to service, the absolute necessity to provide for the people in the present who depended on him for survival.
You know, I'm trying to picture the sheer emotional force of that shift, and it almost reminds me of the physiological response of a drowning swimmer.
How so?
Think about it. If you are swimming alone and you start drowning, you panic. You fight for your own breath, you thrash around, and eventually, if the shore is too far, you might just surrender to the water because the physical exhaustion is simply too much to bear.
Right, you just give up.
But if you are struggling in the water, exhausted, and you suddenly look over and see your own child drowning next to you, a massive, unimaginable spike of adrenaline hits your system.
It changes everything.
The overwhelming biological need to save that other person completely bypasses your own internal exhaustion. It forces you to swim harder, faster, and longer than you ever possibly could if you were only swimming to save yourself. The external duty overrides the internal fatigue.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. It captures the exact biological and psychological reality of a situation. When you are fighting only for your own ego, your reserves of energy are severely limited. Ego is a fragile fuel source.
It really is.
But when you are fighting for the survival of someone you love, your reserves become nearly infinite.
And that is such a profound lesson for anyone listening. If you want to unlock your absolute highest level of performance, if you want to push past burnout and fear, your why must be significantly bigger than your excuses.
Absolutely.
If your primary motivation in business is simply to get rich, to show up the kids who bullied you in high school, or to buy a fancy car to prove an old boss wrong, you will eventually burn out. Or worse, you will self-sabotage when you get close to the finish line.
You let the cop into the gambling den.
Exactly. But when your motivation shifts from ego to service, when you are genuinely fighting to provide for those who depend on you, to protect your employees' livelihoods, to serve your family, you become truly unstoppable.
That night in the dark bedroom, the internal monologue finally changed. The cruel voice of his father was finally silenced, drowned out by the cries of his children.
The ghost was gone.
He realized that holding on to his past trauma, nurturing that anger, was a luxury he could no longer afford. He had a family to feed the very next morning. The past was dead, only the present mattered.
Which brings us to the synthesis of this entire incredible journey. If we step back and look at these 5 key ideas we've explored today, the abusive programming in the cellar, the gritty street sales and the law of numbers, the dangerous trap of easy money, the devastating cost of blind trust, and finally, the ultimate catalyst of external responsibility. How do we tie all of this together? What is the one core insight representing the very soul of this chapter?
The insight is this, and it is something everyone should remember. Your absolute lowest point is not a life sentence. It is the raw, unrefined material for your greatest victory. When you look closely at the architecture of his life, every beating in that cellar, every rejection on that freezing newspaper route, every terrifying night in a boxcar, and every catastrophic business failure was secretly, quietly building an impenetrable psychological armor.
He was being forged.
It was an involuntary, brutal masterclass in human nature. He learned resilience because he had to. He learned how to read desperation in other men's eyes. He learned the mathematical mechanics of persistence, and he learned the bitter, unforgettable cost of trusting the wrong people.
All of that pain, all of those failures, was essentially tuition. He was paying the tuition for an education in human behavior that you simply cannot buy at Harvard Business School.
Precisely. And the alchemy, the magic, happens in that one moment of ultimate crisis in his kitchen.
When June asks the question,
When you finally start using your traumatic past as an excuse to fail, and instead start utilizing the skills and the thick skin you developed in that past as the fuel to provide for others, that is the exact moment the loser dies and the winner is born.
he didn't succeed in spite of his background.
He succeeded because of it. He finally figured out how to weaponize the survival skills that background forced him to develop.
It completely reframes the entire concept of failure. It turns every single loss, every scam, every tear into a delayed asset. It means nothing is wasted.
Nothing is wasted if you survive it and apply it. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over today. In the text, he refers to this driving force as a bag of groceries, a fundamental, undeniable, visceral reason that you must succeed today.
The bag of groceries.
So ask yourself, if you strip away your ego, if you strip away your fancy job title, if you throw out your 5-year plan and your carefully curated vision board, what is the one raw, undeniable thing you are truly fighting for right now? When the repo man is at the door, what is your bag of groceries?
That is the question that changes everything. Now that the fire has been lit and the true why has been found, join us next time on our deep dive as we discover exactly what happened the very next morning. We're going to see what happens when a desperate man with absolutely zero professional experience walks onto a car lot armed with nothing but the burning desire to feed his family and ends up changing the sales world forever.
What if the ultimate secret to becoming, the greatest salesperson in the world wasn't a slick pitch or a perfect smile or even like a killer closing technique? What if it was just, and I mean this literally, a simple, desperate need for a bag of groceries?
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but that is exactly what we're unpacking today.
Yeah.
We're doing a deep dive into Chapter 3, which is titled, It All Begins with Want, from Joe Girard's classic guide to selling.
Right.
And in just a couple sentences, what you're about to learn is how pinpointing a very specific, burning internal motivation, like a core want, can just completely transform your ability to overcome massive barriers.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, it lets you sell anything and succeed in any entrepreneurial thing you try. And it matters because technique, without that driving motivation behind it, is basically useless.
It's totally useless. And I think, when most of us picture high-level business success today or like elite salesmanship, we're really conditioned to visualize something highly sanitized.
Oh, for sure. Very corporate.
Yeah, exactly. We picture this modern executive in a sharp suit, armed with a tablet full of data analytics, predictive modeling, and perfectly engineered psychological closing scripts.
Right, like success is some clinical academic process.
Exactly. But stepping into the world of Joe Girard, specifically in the early 1960s, it just completely shatters that polished image. Like, we aren't looking at a boardroom here. We're looking at a man backed into an absolute corner, just staring down total financial and personal ruin.
Yeah, and to understand the mechanisms of his eventual success, and I mean, we are talking about a man who would go on to be audited by Deloitte and Touche and recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the greatest retail salesman in the world.
Which is still just wild to me.
It is wild. But to get it, we have to analyze the specific environment he was operating in, because the foundation of his career was built on what most people would consider insurmountable handicaps.
Yeah.
When he finally walked into a Chevrolet dealership to ask for a job, he was 35 years old. He had zero experience in selling cars. I mean, none.
And didn't he ask a friend for help right before that?
He did. He approached a friend who was already working in the automotive business and asked for a position. And that friend completely dismissed him, just brushed him off, and pointed out that Girard knew absolutely nothing about the mechanics of selling.
Wow. And, he had actually tried his hand at a number of different ventures before this, and they didn't exactly end well, right?
No, not at all.
The source material details this catastrophic attempt at home building that left him $60,000 in debt. And just to put that in perspective for anyone listening, $60,000 in the early 1960s is roughly the equivalent of $500,000 today.
Yeah, it's an absolutely crushing amount of debt.
It's insane. And he got into that hole because he trusted the wrong person regarding a sewer line in Mount Clemens, Michigan, which just ruined the entire development project.
Right, completely tanked it.
So he is carrying this massive financial weight. But the lack of resume experience and the financial ruin, those weren't even the biggest hurdles, were they? He was fighting a much deeper battle.
Yeah, a systemic one. We really need to look closely at his stutter,
Right.
because from the time he was about 8 years old, Girard suffered from a severe speech impediment. And if we examine the context in the text, this wasn't just a random genetic trait. It was a direct trauma response.
Wait, really? A trauma response?
Yeah, exactly. He grew up in a household with an incredibly abusive father who would frequently uh, take him down to the cellar, beat him, and constantly demean him, tell him he was a bum, that he had no value, and that he was basically destined for a state prison.
Oh, man. That is so incredibly dark.
It is. And when a child is raised in an environment of constant terror and verbal abuse like that, the psychological weight often manifests physically. The nervous system just becomes entirely dysregulated.
So it comes out as a severe stutter.
Exactly. So you have a man attempting to enter a profession that is entirely reliant on verbal communication selling cars face-to-face on a showroom floor. And he literally struggles to form sentences.
Most people dealing with a severe stutter would look at a job in high-pressure sales and just immediately disqualify themselves.
Oh, 100%.
The natural assumption is, you should find a job in a warehouse or behind a desk doing administrative work, somewhere the perceived handicap won't be exposed. They take themselves off the playing field before the game even starts.
Yeah.
But Girard took that exact limitation and turned it into a strategic advantage.
He did. And it's fascinating because medical doctors at the time offered him very blanket, unhelpful advice. They just told him to, talk slower.
Wow. Thanks, Doc. Very helpful.
Right. But the pressure of needing to survive forced him to develop a much more profound coping mechanism than just altering his pacing. He had to teach himself how to concentrate with absolute laser focus.
Because speaking was so physically difficult for him.
Exactly. It caused him immense anxiety, so he literally couldn't afford to waste words. The cognitive load required for him to speak meant he had to mentally map out every single syllable before he opened his mouth.
Okay, so instead of relying on the stereotypical gift of gab that most salespeople use to just steamroll a conversation, he had to operate completely differently.
Right.
If you are constantly mapping out your own sentences in advance, you have to be hyper aware of where the conversation is going. You have to actually absorb what the person across from you is saying.
That is the exact mechanism right there. By attempting to manage his stutter, he accidentally mastered one of the most difficult skills in human communication. He became an elite, hyper-focused listener.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, he absorbed the customer's information, planned a precise, calculated response, and delivered it without all that excess filler. The irony is that by compensating for his speech impediment, he cured the worst habit a standard salesperson possesses.
Which is talking entirely too much.
Exactly. Talking way too much and listening far too little.
Okay, so that covers the internal handicap. But when he finally gets a sympathetic sales manager at a different Chevrolet dealership to actually hire him, he hits this massive structural wall right out of the gate.
Oh yeah, the showroom floor in a 1960s Detroit dealership was fiercely territorial.
I can only imagine.
The terminology they used for the showroom floor was the bull ring or the dope ring. And the business model for car salesmen at that time was heavily, if not entirely, reliant on walk-in traffic.
Right.
A customer walking through the front doors was called an up. And the established salesmen had this rigid system where they took turns taking these walk-ins. They guarded those front doors aggressively.
Because that was their livelihood.
Exactly. When a brand new salesman was hired, the veterans didn't view him as a colleague to be mentored. They viewed him as a direct threat, someone who was going to take a portion of the finite walk-in traffic and literally take food off their tables.
Yeah.
So their immediate reaction was to freeze the new guy out.
So to even get the job, Girard has to make this incredibly unorthodox deal with the manager, right?
He does.
He essentially says, hire me, but I promise I will not take a single walk-in customer. I won't take any ups from the floor. I will generate every single one of my customers myself. Which means he is starting from absolute zero.
Absolute zero. The text notes, he didn't even receive a draw.
And a draw is basically the standard base salary advance that salesmen get to keep the lights on while they build a commission pipeline, right?
Yeah, exactly. No draw. He didn't even get a demonstrator car to drive around. The manager literally points to a desk and a phone. That is the entirety of his starting equipment.
Just a desk and a phone.
Yep. It is a staggering amount of pressure to voluntarily take on. I
Mm.
mean, he cut off the only reliable source of immediate income in that industry. But this self-imposed handicap functioned as the crucible for his long-term success.
This sounds exactly like the dynamic of a modern bootstrapped startup trying to enter a crowded market.
Oh, that's a great comparison. How so?
Well, imagine a tiny tech company launching today with zero marketing budget. They are going up against massive legacy corporations that are spending millions on paid search ads, social media campaigns, television spots, all of that. Those big companies rely entirely on that paid walk-in traffic to survive. But the bootstrap startup can't afford a single ad. They have to be infinitely more creative. They have to rely on raw hustle, building organic communities, doing things that don't scale.
Yeah, creating a product so good that word of mouth replaces a marketing budget.
Exactly. And very often, because the startup is forced to master the absolute fundamentals of customer acquisition without the crutch of paid ads, they build a much stronger foundation. By the time they actually get funding, their processes are so dialed in that they just easily overtake the lazy incumbents who just threw money at the wall.
The underlying principle is identical, and the practical takeaway for you as the listener applies directly to whatever field you're in. We all face perceived handicaps.
Absolutely.
You might be lacking venture capital funding. You might be trying to break into an industry without an Ivy League degree. You might face a lack of personal connections or just intense systemic gatekeeping.
Which is super common.
Very common. And the default human instinct is to view those limitations as impenetrable walls. But Girard's methodology suggests viewing them as forcing functions. When you do not have the luxury of an established pipeline or a marketing budget or even the luxury of effortless speech, you are forced to strip away the fad.
Yeah, you have to.
You rely entirely on mastering precision, relentless effort, and unorthodox strategy.
So let's look at what relying on the absolute bare minimum actually looks like in practice. Because he is sitting at a desk, he has a phone, he is expressly forbidden from talking to the warm bodies walking through the dealership doors. How do you sell a car to someone when there is literally no one in front of you?
Right. And this introduces the concept of scrappy prospecting, or really the power of unorthodox, imperfect action.
Yes.
When you lack the standard tools of your trade, your only option is to invent your own from the materials at hand. Consider the expectations of a modern salesperson today. They sit down on their first day and expect to be logged into a highly optimized customer relationship management software.
Oh, yeah. CRM is bare minimum now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They expect a database of pre-qualified leads, automated email drip campaigns, analytical tools that tell them exactly who to call and when. Girard had none of that infrastructure.
Nothing.
He didn't have a single name to call. But instead of sitting at his desk paralyzed by his lack of resources or waiting for the manager to provide him with a perfect setup, he utilized the most rudimentary tool available.
And this is the part that just blows my mind. He reaches over and grabs the Detroit telephone directory. And he doesn't just open it. He physically tears 4 pages completely at random right out of the binder.
Yep, just rips them right out.
2 pages from the white pages, which represent residential homes, and 2 pages from the yellow pages representing local businesses, because, businesses need to buy trucks. And those 4 torn, crumpled pages from a phone book become his entire prospect list.
It is a profound demonstration of taking immediate, massive action. He completely bypassed the paralysis of preparation. He didn't spend 3 weeks researching the ideal demographic profile of a Chevrolet buyer in the 1963 Detroit metropolitan area.
Right.
He didn't spend a month organizing index cards by zip code to optimize his route. He simply ripped out the pages and started rotating the dial on the phone.
Okay, but hold on. Because if we apply this methodology today, it sounds like a terrible idea.
Oh, sure.
Like, if I sit down at my laptop, open up an industry directory, close my eyes, pick a random name, and cold call a stranger to ask them to buy a $20,000 product, I'm going to get hung up on, blocked, and probably reported for spam.
Definitely.
It violates every rule of targeted marketing. It's incredibly inefficient. You're going to get wrong numbers, disconnected lines, people who just bought a car yesterday, people who don't even have a driver's license.
Right.
So why didn't this completely backfire on him?
Because while it is entirely inefficient from a data perspective, you are looking at it through the lens of optimization. And that completely misses the psychological goal he was trying to achieve.
Okay, what was the goal then?
The genius of the torn phone book pages isn't about the quality of the leads. It's about the activation of the salesman. When you are starting from absolute zero, your biggest enemy is not inefficiency. Your biggest enemy is inertia.
Inertia.
Yes, it is the overwhelming, crushing weight of doing nothing while the clock ticks.
So the goal wasn't necessarily to sell a car on the first dial. The goal was simply to break the silence at the desk.
Precisely. Girard later referenced a phrase he learned from his neighborhood. If you throw enough spaghetti against the wall, some of it has got to stick. And the core lesson for you here is that action beats perfection.
Yeah.
Yes, he hit dead ends. He reached people who didn't speak English. He got people who hung up on him immediately. But analyze the actual cost of a bad call. If he makes 10 bad calls in a row, it costs him perhaps 4 minutes of his time.
Right, it's just a few minutes.
But on the 11th call, someone answers. They say they aren't looking for a car today, but maybe in 6 months when their current lease is up. He writes that name down. He now has a tangible lead. He has an appointment for the future. He has motion.
That makes so much sense. If he had sat there trying to figure out the mathematically perfect way to source a lead without breaking the rules of the floor, he would have made 0 calls that entire day.
Exactly 0.
The phone book forced him into the trenches. It gave him repetitions. It built up his psychological calluses against rejection so that a no stopped feeling like a personal attack and just became a data point.
And that imperfect action sets up the foundation for everything that followed. Those completely random, inefficient calls eventually yielded a few actual sales. Those sales yielded referrals.
Right.
Those referrals were eventually fed into a meticulous, highly organized filing system that he built later in his career. The torn phone book pages were never meant to be his permanent business strategy.
Sure.
They were the starter motor that turned over the massive engine of his career. You do not need the perfect setup to begin. You just need to initiate contact with the market.
I love that. So if you are sitting on a project or a business idea or sales quota right now, and you find yourself waiting for your website to be perfectly designed or for your business cards to arrive from the printer or for your prospect list to be meticulously scrubbed, you are falling into the preparation trap.
You absolutely are.
You have to pick up the metaphorical phone book. Start dialing. Start emailing, start building. The friction of interacting with the real market will teach you what you need to know far faster than sitting in a vacuum of theory.
Well said. And this brings us to the most emotionally resonant component of Chapter 3.
Yeah.
We have analyzed his physical handicaps. We've analyzed his scrappy, imperfect action. But we have to examine the fuel inside the engine.
The motivation.
Yes. What actually made him pick up the phone after being hung up on 10 times? What gave him the audacity to walk into that dealership in the first place? This requires an exploration of the psychology of want and the metaphor of the bag of groceries.
Yeah, and reading through this section of the source material hits incredibly hard. I mean, the text details his absolute break-in point. He owes $60,000. The bank is actively trying to repossess his car.
Right.
He is literally parking his car several blocks away from his own house and sneaking in through the alley and over the back fence just so the repo men don't spot him.
It's unbelievable stress.
And then comes the moment that shifts everything. He comes home one night and his wife looks at him and asks for money for groceries. He has nothing in his pockets. 0. And she asks him the question that would terrify any parent. What are the kids going to eat?
It is a moment of profound, visceral desperation. The text describes him sitting up all night. He is fighting off the internal echoes of his abusive father.
Yeah.
The voice telling him he's a worthless bum who will never amount to anything. In that dark room, he realizes he has to do something immediately. His motivation is no longer about building a grand career. He isn't thinking about becoming a millionaire or getting his name in a record book. His entire focus narrows down to a single biological imperative. He has to feed his children the very next day.
Wow.
That is the exact psychological state he is in when he walks onto the Chevrolet dealership floor.
So let's look at the mechanics of his very first sale, because it perfectly illustrates how the psychology of want overrides standard business protocol. It's his first day at the desk. He has explicitly promised the manager he will not take any walk-in traffic. But, as chance would have it, a man walks through the front doors of the showroom, and there happens to be absolutely no other salesman around to take the up.
The floor is completely empty.
Completely empty. So Girard, in his state of desperation, breaks his own rule. He abandons the desk, swoops in, and takes the customer.
And the customer turns out to be a salesman for Coca-Cola. What is truly fascinating about Girard's recounting of this pivotal moment is what he does not remember. If you interview most elite salespeople about their first major close, their memory is usually photographic. They can tell you the weather that day, the exact model and color of the product, the specific objection the customer raised, and the exact phrase they used to overcome it and seal the deal.
Yeah, it's burned into their brain.
But Girard remembers almost none of those details. He doesn't remember the man's face. He doesn't remember the specific model of Chevrolet the man bought. He doesn't even remember his own sales pitch.
Which is wild. If this was the most important sale of his entire life, the transaction that literally fed his kids and launched his career, how does he not remember a single detail about the human being standing in front of him?
He forgot the details because his brain was no longer registering the mechanics of an automotive transaction. He wasn't seeing a man in a suit looking for a vehicle. When Girard looked at that Coca-Cola salesman, his brain experienced a psychological override. He hallucinated, quite literally.
Oh, wait, literally?
He writes that all he saw, standing right there in the middle of the showroom floor, was a giant bag of groceries.
He literally visualized a bag of groceries superimposed over the customer.
Exactly. A bag of groceries that represented his family's immediate survival. He didn't need to know the technical specifications of the car's engine. He didn't need to employ advanced psychological closing techniques.
Because the need was just so raw.
Exactly. His internal want was so massive, so binding, and so undeniably urgent that it subconsciously hijacked his nervous system. It guided his actions, regulated his stutter, and fueled his persistence to do whatever was required to keep that man in the building and get a signature on the contract. He wasn't selling a car that day. He was fighting for his family's life.
And he succeeded. He got the signature. And the first thing he did afterward wasn't to, celebrate his new career path or brag to the other salesmen.
No, not at all.
He went straight to the sales manager, begged for a $10 loan against his future commission from that sale, ran out of the dealership, and bought the bag of groceries to take home. It's an incredible story of survival.
It really is.
But I want to pause here and examine this from a practical relationship building perspective. Because if I am a customer and I walk into a dealership and the salesman is secretly looking at me, not as a human being with my own needs, but just as a meal ticket, I mean, people can smell that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Doesn't that reek of desperation? If you just view the customer as an object you need to extract money from to survive, doesn't that make you aggressive, pushy, and ultimately terrible at building long-term trust? Isn't that super manipulative?
That is a very astute observation, and it highlights a crucial nuance in how we apply this concept. It is very easy to misinterpret Girard's bag of groceries metaphor as permission to treat the customer poorly.
Right, like they're just a means to an end.
Exactly. But there is a massive difference between external panic and internal clarity. Girard is not suggesting that you project desperation onto the customer or that you treat them with disrespect, lie to them, or force them into a terrible deal just to get your commission.
Right.
If you do that, you will fail long term. And as his career progressed, his entire methodology was actually built on treating the customer exceptionally well and turning them into lifelong advocates.
So how does hallucinating a bag of groceries actually help you serve the customer better?
Well, the bag of groceries is not about how you treat the customer. It is about how you anchor your own internal endurance. The reality of sales, or starting a business, is that it is an incredibly brutal emotional gauntlet, especially in the beginning.
Oh, it's exhausting.
You face rejection, apathy, rudeness, and failure on an hourly basis. If your motivation is abstract, if your internal narrative is simply, I want to hit my quarterly quota, or I want to be recognized as successful, or I want to be my manager happy, that motivation is fundamentally weak.
Because it's not tied to anything real.
Right. It is not tied to your biological survival.
Okay.
When you face a harsh rejection or a customer gives you a weak objection, an abstract motivation will not sustain you. You will flinch. You will accept the no and let the customer walk out the door because it is emotionally easier to quit than to keep pushing.
Yeah, the abstract corporate goal doesn't trigger the fight or flight response.
Exactly. What Girard did was tie the micro action of the present moment, having a conversation with this specific prospect, to his ultimate, most primal macro desire, which was providing food for his children.
That makes a lot of sense.
When you establish that link, you unlock an entirely different level of drive. You don't accept no easily, not because you want to bully the customer, but because your brain views losing the sale as a direct threat to your survival. And counterintuitively, this makes you deeply empathetic to the customer's needs.
Why is that?
Because solving the customer's problem is the only possible way you secure the transaction and get what you need. You have to serve them perfectly to earn your survival.
He didn't see the man as an object to be abused. He saw the transaction as the lifeline he had to secure at all costs. And to secure it, he had to provide value. The practical takeaway for you is that you have to ruthlessly define your own core want.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be as dramatic as saving your family from literal starvation.
Thank goodness.
All right, very few of us are operating under that specific kind of pressure. But your want must be concrete. It must be deeply personal. And it must carry a sense of urgency.
Let's apply this to a modern scenario. Let's say you are a freelance graphic designer trying to build a client base. You know you need to send out cold pitch emails, but you hate doing it, you fear the rejection, or you just find the process tedious.
Which is super common for freelancers.
Very common. And if your goal is broadly defined as, I want to grow my freelance business, you will find a million excuses not to send those emails today. You will redesign your own logo for the 5th time. You will organize your desktop folders. You will procrastinate because the goal is abstract.
Yep.
But what if you redefine your want? What if your specific want is, I need to generate enough extra income this month to pay for my mother's out-of-pocket medical expenses. Or, I need to secure 3 new retainers so I can finally put a down payment on a house and get my kids out of a cramped apartment.
Now that changes everything. Once you define that highly concrete personal want, you have to practice the exact psychological anchoring that Girard used.
Right.
Before you draft that scary email, before you pick up the phone, before you walk into a networking event where you don't know anyone, you visualize that specific outcome. You do not look at the phone number you are dialing as just another prospect. You look at that phone number as a month of your mother's medical care.
Oh, wow.
You look at that email draft as the physical bricks for your kid's new house. You must conceptually tie every single routine, boring, or terrifying task directly to that specific want. When the rejection comes, it won't break your momentum because you are no longer fighting for a simple yes from a stranger.
You are fighting for the house.
Exactly. You are fighting for the medical care. That is the actual utility of identifying your want.
It takes the sanitized, abstract corporate jargon of KPIs and sales funnels and replaces it with a raw, beating human heart. It's like that famous Nietzsche concept. If you have a strong enough why, you can bear almost any how.
Yes, perfectly stated.
And Girard's how involved ripping random pages out of a Detroit phone book and fighting through a paralyzing trauma-induced stutter. His why was the bag of groceries.
So if we synthesize this entire sequence of events, from the stuttering child hiding in a cellar, to the failed builder dodging repo men in the alley, to the desperate man tearing up the telephone directory, to the triumphant salesman securing the $10 loan to feed his family, the unifying truth that emerges from Chapter 3 is unambiguous.
Which is?
Technique is fundamentally secondary to motivation.
That's huge. Because there is a multi-billion-dollar industry today built entirely on selling people the exact perfect sales scripts, the perfect closing frameworks, and the optimal software stacks.
Oh, absolutely. And those tools certainly have utility as you scale. But Girard's origin story proves that you can possess all the advanced scripts, all the slick corporate training, and the most expensive software in the world, and they will sit completely dormant if you lack a burning internal fire to execute them. Conversely, you can start with 0 scripts, 0 formal training, a severe physical speech impediment, and a torn piece of a phone book. And if you know exactly what you want and your desire for it is urgent enough, you will figure out a way to bypass your limitations and succeed. Desperation, when it is channeled effectively into solving the customer's problem, is the ultimate catalyst for momentum.
It strips away ego.
Exactly. It strips away ego, it obliterates procrastination, and it leaves you with nothing but action.
It is the ultimate equalizer. You can consistently outwork the person with the Ivy League degree, the perfect resume, and the endless funding if your internal want is more sharply defined than theirs. Everything, at its core, begins with want.
It is the bedrock upon which the most statistically successful retail sales career in history was built. I mean, before the Guinness World Records, before the audits, before the fame, there was simply a desk, a phone, and a desperate, undeniable need to provide groceries.
As we wrap up our analysis of Chapter 3, it actually leaves us on a fascinating psychological cliffhanger.
How?
Well, we have spent this entire time dissecting Girard's internal state, right? His desperation, his structural handicaps, and his bag of groceries. But selling is fundamentally a dynamic interaction between two people.
Right.
So once you have harnessed the raw internal power of your own want, What happens when that bag of groceries turns back into a complex human being?
Ah, yeah.
A customer who just walked through the showroom doors and who is likely just as scared of being taken advantage of, just as defensive, and just as worried about their own financial security as you are. How do you bridge that gap and actually connect with them? We'll see how Girard completely flips his perspective and uses empathy as his ultimate tool in our next deep dive into Chapter 4. The Mooch is a human being.
What if I told you that um, a single bad mood on a random Tuesday morning could silently cost you 250 future opportunities?
Oh, wow.
Right. And not theoretically. We're talking as a mathematical certainty.
It almost sounds like a curse or something.
It really does. But it's not superstition. It is an immutable law of human networks.
Like a biological contagion just waiting for you to slip up.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack this excerpt from a legendary sales manual by a guy named Joe Girard.
Joe Girard, I mean, recognized by the Guinness Book of Records as the world's greatest retail salesman.
Yeah, he sold over 13,000 cars one by one, which is just insane.
It's unheard of.
Right. And today, we are exploring a concept so powerful that it will honestly fundamentally change how you view every human interaction from this day forward.
You're definitely going to take notes on this one.
For sure. Whether you are an entrepreneur, a freelancer, or, just looking to level up your career, you are about to learn the hidden mathematical multiplier behind word of mouth.
And why treating just one person poorly is the most expensive mistake you can ever make.
So let's set the stage a bit here. To really get the weight of this, we have to look at the environment where Girard made this discovery.
Yeah, the automotive sales floors of Detroit in the mid to late 20th century.
Belly-to-belly combat, essentially.
And literally, I mean, think about the visceral reality of that environment. It was an adversarial battlefield.
Customers walking in terrified.
Exactly. They were scared, they were guarded, they fully expected to be taken advantage of.
Because there were no internet reviews. Right.
Eh.
No social media to keep anyone honest.
Right. Business was viewed as a zero-sum game. For me to win, you have to lose. And the professionals were often incredibly impatient.
Just worked on pure commission, trying to burn and churn.
Yeah, squeeze every dime and move on to the next piece of foot traffic.
So what's fascinating here is that Girard didn't get his world record by, inventing a better manipulation tactic.
No, he didn't rely on cheap tricks at all. He actually discovered a fundamental law of human sociology.
And it forced him to completely override his own impatience. So, okay, let's unpack exactly how he discovered this magic number.
Because it wasn't in a boardroom or a textbook.
No, it was at life's most profound gatherings, funerals and weddings.
Which, sociologically speaking, is exactly where you'd find the truest measure of a person's actual social footprint.
Right. So early in his career, Girard is at a Catholic funeral home in Detroit, paying respect to a friend's mother.
Okay.
And in the Catholic tradition, they hand out these mass cards, little printed cards with the person's picture and a prayer.
A physical token to remember them by.
Yeah. And Girard, who's clearly always analyzing things, he looks at these cards and a logistical question pops into his head.
He's looking for the operational metrics of grief.
Exactly. He goes up to the undertaker and asks, how do you know how many of these to print? Do you just guess?
Such a brilliant question.
And the undertaker gives him a data-driven answer. He says experience shows, based on the actual registry books people sign, the average number of attendees is 250.
250. It's such a specific number.
Very specific.
And it immediately brings up Robin Dunbar's work, Dunbar's number.
Oh, right, the anthropologist. Let's talk about that.
So Dunbar theorized in the 90s that there's a cognitive limit to how many stable relationships a human can maintain, based on brain size.
And his number was what, 150?
Roughly 150, yeah. The people you'd feel comfortable grabbing a drink with if you bumped into them at a bar.
But the undertaker told Girard 250. So why the gap?
Well, it's a crucial distinction. Dunbar's 150 is active maintenance. It takes time and grooming.
Okay.
But Girard's 250 is the event number. It's your extended network.
I see.
It's the active ties plus like 100 historical ties. People who hold enough emotional weight to literally take off work and show up to mourn you.
That makes so much sense. But Girard didn't just stop there. He wanted to cross-check this.
Because one undertaker's word isn't a universal law.
Right. So later, he sells a card to a Protestant funeral director. Different demographic completely.
Yeah, different traditions.
And after the paperwork is done, he asks him the exact same question. What's the average turnout?
And let me guess.
250.
Wow. So cross-cultural validation.
Yep. But then he takes it to the other end of the emotional spectrum. Not just tragedy, but celebration.
Weddings.
Exactly. He's at a wedding reception, talks to the caterer, and asks, what's the average guest count?
And the caterer says 250 for the bride, 250 for the groom.
Bingo. 3 specific encounters. Catholic funeral, Protestant funeral, secular wedding, all pointing to the same constant.
The law of 250. It's like the gravitational constant of social networking decades before Facebook.
So for you listening, this means everyone you meet has an inner circle of roughly 250 people who care enough to show up for them.
And this isn't a passive social media following. We aren't talking about weak ties.
That's right, not a random Instagram follower.
Exactly. A weak tie might like a photo, but they won't buy a car based on a recommendation.
Yeah.
Girard is talking about strong ties, a tangible network of trust and influence. These people take your advice.
But okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Because I can hear a freelancer or a retail worker listening right now saying, yeah, but the everyday person walking into my store isn't inviting me to their wedding.
Right.
They aren't writing me into their will. It's just a transaction. Why treat them like a VIP?
That is the exact transactional trap that makes people plateau in their careers.
How so?
Because they don't have to invite you. That misses the point entirely. The point is they are a central node to their 250 people.
A central node. I love that.
You're never talking to just one person. Every single person sitting across from you is a hidden gateway to a packed stadium of prospects.
So you're literally auditioning for their entire network.
Auditioning is the perfect word.
Yeah.
Because if you treat them poorly, that resentment is instantly syndicated to those 250 people.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting, and honestly, a bit terrifying. The catastrophic math of alienation.
But let's break down the actual arithmetic of failure here.
So Girard reverse engineered this. Let's say you see 50 people a week in your job.
Pretty standard.
And you're generally great.
Mm.
But you have a bad day. You spilled your coffee, you're stressed, you get impatient, and turn off just 2 of those people.
Just 2 out of 50.
Right. Now, in any normal review, a boss would say 48 out of 50 is a huge win. That's a 96% success rate.
On a test, that's an A. It feels like a negligible margin of error.
But apply the law of 250. 2 unhappy people times 250 friends.
That's 500 people.
500 people influenced negatively against you in a single week.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it compounds.
Brutally. Over a year. Keeping that tiny error rate. That's 5,000 people.
Oh my God.
And over Girard's 14-year career, 70,000 people completely alienated.
Just try to conceptualize that scale. That is an NFL stadium filled to max capacity.
Every seat.
Every single seat filled with someone who actively dislikes you and warns their friends about you, just from losing your patience twice a week.
It's staggering, and the book has this vivid example to illustrate this. The Sam Glotz scenario.
A brilliant case study in network degradation.
So a guy walks into a dealership, deals with a salesman named Sam Glotz. Sam is having a bad day, gives the guy a lousy attitude, totally brushes him off.
Rushes him, makes him feel stupid.
Exactly. Now, the customer doesn't yell. He doesn't ask for a manager.
Because that's how most lost business happens. It's silent. They just vanish.
Right. So he goes back to his office, slams his briefcase down. A coworker asks what's wrong. And he says, man, I just got the brush off from Sam Glotz. He's a total jerk.
The virus has been released into the ventilation system.
Yes. Now, fast forward 3 months. That coworker is at a barbecue, says he needs a car. Someone mentions Sam Glotz's dealership.
And the coworker, who has never even met Sam Glotz, recoils.
He says, no way. Stay away from Sam. I heard he treats people like garbage.
And Sam just lost a sale he didn't even know he was competing for.
Why does the coworker remember that passing comment 3 months later? That's what blew my mind.
This is where we get into evolutionary psychology. It's negativity bias.
Okay, unpack that.
From a survival standpoint, humans are hardwired to prioritize negative information.
Like to stay alive.
Exactly. If someone says, hey, I found good berries by the river, that's nice. But if they say, do not go to the river, there's a lion.
The amygdala lights up.
Yes, the fear center. We are biologically programmed to share warnings to protect the tribe.
So today, instead of lions, we're warning people about rude salespeople.
Exactly. Bad news travels efficiently. The 48 happy people are whispering, but the 2 alienated people are screaming through a megaphone.
The whisper versus the megaphone.
Yeah.
So that 96% success rate isn't good enough if the 4% are poisoning your network.
It's an illusion, a catastrophic leak that will sink your career.
And wait, it gets worse. Because Girard talks about super connectors.
Oh, this is the most volatile variable in the whole theory.
Right, like what if the person you brushed off isn't just a quiet office worker? What if they're a lodge president? Or a barber?
If you alienate a barber, you're practically taking out a billboard against yourself.
I mean, think about a barber's day. They have a captive audience all day long.
And their job is conversation.
Yeah.
And there's this parasocial trust there. We trust our barber because it's intimate. We share our problems.
So if your barber leans in and says, hey, don't go to Sam Glotz, he's garbage.
You take it as gospel truth. You never question it because the barber has no financial incentive to lie.
Right, they're just protecting the tribe. And a barber might talk to 250 people in a single week.
Exactly. The mathematical multiplier accelerates exponentially. You just burst a dam.
So hearing all this,
Yeah.
how do you actually survive? Girard must have had a system to not lose his mind.
He did. He realized just trying to be nice wasn't enough. He instituted a policy of total emotional quarantine.
Total emotional quarantine.
Yeah, an absolute rule. You have to keep your personal feelings, your bad moods, completely out of your interactions.
Even with the incredibly difficult people, Girard uses some very 1970s terms for them. The booches, the flakes, the finks, and the pipe smokers.
Which translate perfectly to today.
Let's do the translation.
The mooch wants free advice over coffee, but never signs a contract.
The flake reschedules 3 times and doesn't read your emails.
And the pipe smoker is the academic tire kicker who just wants to debate your proposal for 3 hours to sound smart.
With zero intention of buying. Just energy vampires.
And human nature screams at you to shut them down.
Right, to put them in their place. But Girard explicitly says, all of these people can be money in your pocket.
You cannot turn a single one away with anger or a smart-ass remark.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here. Because isn't that just being fake?
This raises an important question about boundaries. Yeah.
Because if a customer's a total jerk, aren't we supposed to set boundaries? Is Girard saying we just swallow our pride and be a doormat?
It's vital to distinguish between an abusive client and a frustrating one.
Okay.
Girard isn't saying you endure genuine harassment or physical threats. Safety first.
Right, of course.
But the mooches and flakes aren't abusing you usually. They're inconveniencing you. They're testing your patience.
So where's the line?
It's about supreme emotional discipline. Your true feelings of annoyance are a luxury you cannot afford.
A luxury.
You aren't being a doormat. You're making a cold, calculated business decision.
So what does this all mean for the listener on a daily basis?
Think about the mechanics. When you send that passive-aggressive email to a flake, what are you buying?
An ego boost.
A 3-second dopamine hit of feeling superior. But what is the price tag of that dopamine hit?
Well, based on the math, you just paid for it with 250 potential clients.
Exactly. Let's say an average client brings you $1,000 over their lifetime.
Okay.
If you lose your temper with one flake, you didn't just lose their $1,000, you just paid $250,000 for the privilege of telling someone off.
Oh, wow. You finance your own ego trip with a $250,000 penalty.
That is a massive financial hazard. It completely reframes emotional regulation in the workplace.
Because your ego is the most expensive liability on your balance sheet.
So how do we practically do this? How do we build this quarantine?
I like to think of it as putting on a mental hazmat suit.
A hazmat suit. I like that.
Before you open that hostile email or step onto the floor, you zip up the suit, their toxicity just bounces off.
It doesn't touch your core.
Right. And then you treat the interaction as a high-stakes test, a complex puzzle.
Because if you can win over the flake when everyone else in town has yelled at them.
You unlock their entire network.
Which is crazy because often the most difficult people are the most vocal.
The person who complains the loudest will praise you the loudest if you actually solve their problem.
They become your most rabid evangelist. They'll tell their 250 people, hey, nobody else could handle my project, but this person was amazing. It shifts you from playing defense to playing offense. You extract the hidden value of their network by just neutralizing their toxicity.
So my advice to you right now is this. Tomorrow, when the client is dragging their feet or asking that same question for the 4th time,
Don't roll your eyes.
Don't do it. Mentally visualize the number 250 glowing in neon lights directly above their head.
It changes the power dynamic instantly.
You aren't swallowing your pride. You are subjugating your short-term ego for exponential gain.
You're playing chess while they're playing checkers.
And that really ties into the soul of this whole chapter. Girard's law of 250 isn't a networking trick.
It's not a growth hack.
It's a fundamental law of human gravity, proving there is no such thing as an isolated interaction.
Every handshake, every email is embedded in this vast web. And by mastering your emotions, you guarantee unstoppable growth.
So I want to leave you with a provocative thought. Think about the last person who truly annoyed you at work.
Picture their face.
If you knew, as a concrete mathematical fact, that they held the direct keys to 250 of your future successes, how would your tone and your patience change in that exact moment?
The irritation just vanishes.
It really does. So you've got the mindset, you've got the hazmat suit.
Right.
But what happens when the people dragging you down aren't your customers, but your own coworkers?
Oh, that's a whole different battlefield.
It sure is. Next time we dive into why Joe Girard says the most critical rule for ultimate success is simply, don't join the club.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.